one of the words that I heard a couple different people say that I think is really a great launch pad for this conversation is democratizing, right? And I think a lot of people, this will be super intuitive to, but let's just say you've been hiding under a rock somewhere. Maybe you don't know a lot about this. I would love for a couple of you to just sort of say more about democratizing and why it hasn't always been fair and hiring hasn't always been fair. And what are some of the ways in which maybe some folks have been disproportionately excluded from processes. So anyone want to sort of take a stab at that one?
I'll dive in just for fun.
Okay.
I think that, it's interesting that, there's a wide range of issues around that, right? And there are a lot of conversations which are good about subconscious biases and, even the bias that goes into AI from people who have written the software. But, real world for me on a daily, weekly basis is, we talk to a lot of companies who are trying to hire, and we often have to let go of clients just because, there are still people that just, they'll come out and say things that you can't believe that anybody would come out and say. They'll tell you exactly what they want an employee to look like, and just right down to just everything that you shouldn't say. And so, there are still people out there like that. And it's just part of the world. And so I think that, and part of in our paperwork with clients is that obviously you have to be an equal opportunity employer if you want us to work with you. And so I think that, as these solutions and as the growth of AI, and as you're dealing with ACS systems, I do think it's important to remember also that not every company is a place you want to work. And especially as you're on the job hunt, and hey, there's companies that come to us and they want recruiting help. Well, a lot of the times companies that need recruiting help, it's because people don't want to work there because it's a crappy workplace. And so it is important to remember, I think sometimes on the job hunt, there can start to be this feeling of desperation, or I'll take anything, or I just need someone anywhere to give me a chance. And, I think that a lot of folks on the job hunt would be well served to just slightly increase the respect they have for themselves and say, no, I really do want to just go work at a place that is a good place to work. That's going to respect me for who I am. And I think people feel like when they're on the job hunt that all the cards are in the deck of the employer, but that's not really true. If the employer didn't have a problem to solve, they wouldn't be offering money to pay somebody to solve it. And so just respecting yourself in the process and understanding what you bring to the table. Obviously, you got to have some humility. You got to understand that you're not perfect and you need to learn and grow continually throughout your career like we all do. But starting your job search from a place of self-respect and, a quiet confidence about what you're capable of doing for anybody, and you're worth the money. And it's a good mindset to be in as you're going through a job search.
I think you just pulled out a couple of really incredible nuggets. The first one is, as a candidate, you are interviewing the company as much as they are interviewing you, and you really should give your due diligence to do the research to make sure you understand who you are potentially going to work for and what their culture is. Secondly, what I heard you say is, sometimes, especially if you've been laid off, that scarcity mindset sets in, and you're like, what if I don't find a job? What if the severance runs out? I'm the sole provider for my family. And I get chicken skin when I talk about it, because I still remember that feeling as someone who's been through that, thinking like, how am I gonna, right? Bailey, I know you sort of have a unique perspective here. So I'd love, and also I think, Rob, you were incredibly honest that there are some people that bias is truly unconscious, where it's like, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to have that process in my system. Sometimes it's pretty implicit. So thank you for your honesty there. Bailey, I'd love to hear from you. And then after Bailey, I'd love to get Vidal's take as well. So Bailey, what thoughts do you have on this?
When I'm thinking about democratizing access, I think it really is kind of forcing the system a little bit to change. There are people who have who do have antiquated ways of hiring or thinking about finding talent. I would say most, are trying to be good actors. There are some who aren't, but sometimes they haven't evolved the way that they think about hiring today to keep up with the tools that are available to them and the way that they could be doing better. And the things that I tend to pick on a little bit are things like years of experience in a resume or in a job description as a hard requirement, where you're just weeding out people who may be a little shy in terms of number of years, but have definitely done the work or have the skills. Or when you look at higher education, when there are times when it is a requirement, but there are times where is it really? And giving people tools to be able to understand the skills that a job seeker has, where they can actually do a great job, but the way that we have historically screened for people would have weeded them out. And so I think there's a human element where, as hiring managers, it's our responsibility to do better and identify when we are bringing bias into the hiring process. And as product leaders, there is an opportunity to force the tools a little bit to push people into more options, to be able to uncover the great candidates that they may not have historically considered. So there's a technology component, and I really encourage hiring managers to start to play around with all of the amazing tools that are available to reduce bias in the hiring process. But it's not eliminated if you don't bring the human component too. So it's an opportunity to have a deeper conversation with yourself. And I think when we start to bring these together, that's when we can start to really democratize access to opportunities where people are really getting hired based off of their capabilities and their skills, rather than some of the more arbitrary ways that we have historically screened people out.
I love that. Thank you so much. Vidal, I know you had some thoughts on this, and then I want to hear from Jenny before we move on to the next question.
So I'll talk a little bit from the candidate perspective. I think that lots of times people who maybe English isn't their first language, or they come from different cultures, they even have trouble creating things like resumes and different artifacts and documents. Some people don't have the advantage of having someone to coach or advise them on how to prepare for an interview or how to best present themselves. And so I think that AI is going to allow people, for no money or very little money, to be better prepared and present a better side of themselves, where they might just be, like if you get a resume and it has like typos and stuff, or it's not very clear, it might just get thrown out. Now I think people will have, better opportunity to present themselves better and not be, ruled out for those things.
I think I love what you said. And it reminds me of something that's pretty common that I see a lot as a career coach. And that is, I can see from a mile away when someone generated their resume using AI and didn't touch it. So I am a giant fan of AI plus human, right? So AI, and I think a lot of people are just now really starting to understand what AI is and how it works. So AI isn't a job search strategy expert. AI isn't an expert resume writer. AI is sort of taking what you do and it's generating what it believes to be the best content, but it doesn't mean that it's actually the right formatting or that it's the right word choice, right? And so I definitely think it makes it way easier. It's way more cost effective. I also think it's really important that you have the human element and you do your research on, so like a lot of times I'll see resumes and they're written like this. Thomas Keller is a, right? Or I am a, and my personal preference on resume is that you talk about yourself sort of like driven business professional with extensive experience in, right? But AI, it's interesting how AI is making things easier, but it's like, you've got to know how to harness that power. Jenny, I know you had some thoughts, so we'll turn to you, and then I'll give Craig a second to chat, and then we'll move on to the next question after that. Jenny, go ahead.
Thanks, Kim. So I think when you talk about democratizing, there's two groups of people that come to mind. One is for hiring teams. So, there's some really, really talented recruiters out there that are very, very good at uncovering, those hidden gems and those talents. But most teams either have to rely on paying for a lot of expensive tools, which not every team can afford, or they have to, or if you're a startup or a company that can't afford a agency recruiter or a recruiter's fee, you have to find other ways, and you're limited by what's available to you. So I think one aspect is the democratization of how can you create the space where great talent can be uncovered, even in lieu of not having the money to afford certain tools or certain services. The second side of things is from the candidate side. And so for candidates, if you're only relying on applicants, you're really missing on literally everybody else who doesn't know that your job post exists. Even more so passive candidates who are employed and don't have a resume because they are not actively looking, but could be a really great fit for your role. And, I think furthermore, it's well known that often women are less likely to apply for jobs than men if they don't check every single thing off on the job description. They have this habit of self-selecting themselves out of roles. And from a personal story, when I reflect back on the opportunities that most changed my life and gave me the greatest opportunities for growth, and really where I shone, every single one of those opportunities occurred because somebody else saw something in me that I hadn't seen for myself before. Someone kind of gave me that nudge in that direction and said, hey, I think you'd be great for this role. And I was like, oh, me, really? Versus if I had seen that job by myself, I would have never applied. And so when I talk to others, people have this similar story. And so I think today it's important that even in an employer's market, that we remember at the end of the day, it's still humans hiring humans, and therefore diversifying where you find candidates is super critical to make sure you're uncovering not just like the most available talent or the person who, uses AI to create the best resume that a word matches, but actually that, you're finding the best person for the job. And I think that goes on both sides of the coin for both candidates and recruiters or whoever is responsible for hiring.
Yeah, well, I think we implied this, but I think I want to make it a little more expressed. And that is a lot of times it's much, much harder for women to get a job, or for people of color to get a job, or anybody else who has been historically excluded. And there's lots of just natural bias in the hiring process oftentimes. Bailey mentioned this and I kind of laughed. So as someone who has been in diversity, equity, and inclusion for a really long time, I always laugh when I read those job descriptions, because it's like, we would like you to have 15 to 20 years of experience. We'd like you to have a master's degree, or like we require you to have a master's degree. We might consider you if you have a bachelor's degree and you have at least 25 years of experience. We would like you to have, and you like literally the list goes on. And I'm like, it's so tone deaf, because the majority of people that are in diversity, equity, inclusion jobs didn't have access, somehow got into the work because they were passionate about the work, and then eventually moved on. Like someone like me, by the grace of God, I was able to become a director of diversity and inclusion. I'm here to tell you, I don't have a degree. I have an associate's degree. I never went on to get my bachelor's degree. I struggled in school. I have ADHD. I'm dyslexic. School was really, really hard for me. I grew up with a mom who worked 3 jobs. We were incredibly poor. I was terrible at learning. But it's sort of like Jenny said, like, but my potential, and by the grace of God, I've had some people in my career that saw the potential that I had. But if you only rely on these job descriptions, which are archaic and not catered towards women or people of color, most women or people of color are going to look at that job description and be like, no way, I'm not going to apply for that. There's no way someone's going to hire me to do that. And by the way, they've already got 7,000 people that have applied for the job. Why would I apply? Right? Craig, I've made you wait long enough. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this one, and then we'll move to the next question.
No problem. Just to make 2 comments. Earlier, you were talking about using AI and using something like ChatGPT, which I use all the time. The thing is this is very robotic. For anyone out there listening that's thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, this is going to write a resume for me, it's only as good as the user. And I think Kim mentioned this earlier. If you add your own creativity to AI, I'm using ChatGPT all the time. I use it. I copy it. I go through and I make it my own. That is the best way to get things done quicker, use AI properly, and making sure you're getting the most out of it, and still not losing that voice, your own personal voice that's going into that resume, and your own personal skills that are going into that resume, rather than a robotic type of resume that does not sound like you, and they're saying, an employer's looking at reading, saying, yeah, they definitely didn't write their own resume. So in the end, that's how I would use AI to its best. As far as a applicant, that is the best way I would use that. You can use that for a resume, for a cover letter. You can use that for any type of skills. Pop it in and use it.
That's great. It's great. I'd love to know, Craig, from you specifically, since you did work at Meta and you were hiring people that did AI, is there any way at Meta, because I'm sure people will be really excited to hear from a recruiter who worked at Meta, is there any AI that Meta is using to identify candidates, or any special tools that you had access to try to identify those ideal candidates? I'd love just to hear a little bit about how you sourced candidates at Meta.
Absolutely. There are tools. However, a lot of it is very human based. Okay. So at the level that I had, it was a lot of it. It depends on the level that you're at Meta, but at the level I was recruiting at, it was a lot of one-on-one, going out and trying to find those candidates. What we used, as far as LinkedIn Recruiter, LinkedIn Insights, everything, easy hour, whatever they gave us, whatever tools they gave us, you try to use to the best of your ability. It still comes down to keywords on the resume. It still comes down to a recruiter knowing exactly what they're looking for. To add into the conversation, my goals were essentially you had to have a 21% higher, a diversity rate of 21% or higher at a leadership. We were looking, I believe the number was looking at all leaders. We were going to have 30% of leaders at Meta, it be some sort of, a diverse candidate. And that is a diversity and inclusiveness was huge. And the way we battled that was by using AI. I mean, you can even use certain Google searches and image searches as a recruiter to try to find someone. And that's what we did do. And it's how I hit my numbers to get to that point. I hope that explains it in the best way I could.
No, you actually just brought up a really great point, because I want to point something out for somebody, for the folks out there that may not understand why this is so important. A lot of times in the diversity and inclusion field, I will get things like, I don't understand why we have to hire a diverse hire just to hire a diverse hire. That's not what Craig is talking about. Like, we're not just hiring diverse people out of the kindness of our heart because we have that's not what this is. What this is that Harvard did a article not too long ago that says if you only have one woman in your final pool of talent, they statistically have no chance of getting hired. If you have a person of color and there's only one, they statistically have no chance of getting hired. But if you put two women in your final panel, the chances of one of them getting hired goes up by like 78%. If you have two people of color in your final panel, the chances of one of them getting hired goes up by like 194%. And what's really interesting is if you put a woman and a person of color in the final panel, it doesn't make a difference. And so a lot of what Craig's talking about is we do have a tendency in corporate America to put these outrageous things in our job descriptions that deter people from applying, or we have processes when we're hiring that create a lot of bias. Like, so for example, when I won't say the company, but there's a company that I work with where I was working on removing bias from their hiring processes. And as I was doing my research and my investigation, like one of the really most popular questions I found is like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? What does your favorite flavor of ice cream have to do with your competency, your skill set, right? And then the other piece that I think is even more complex is that we know women and people of color disproportionately are not represented in the STEM field, which makes it even harder to find those folks. And so being really intentional in your hiring practices so that you can find those folks and figure out where they are is really meaningful.